I was bent over the counter, my hands deep inside the guts of an old brass alarm clock, when it happened again. My fingers weren't just moving, they were remembering. I didn't think about which screws to loosen, which gears to slide free. My hands just did it. My chest tightened the same way it had the last 3 times, and a strange taste rose in my mouth. Metallic and bitter, like pennies. I stopped, looking at the mess of tiny springs and wheels spread on the felt mat, and muttered it under my breath, without even meaning to slow, they'll find it. It wasn't the first time I'd said something like that lately. I'd caught myself whispering odd phrases all month, never in my own voice. They came out low, with an accent I couldn't place. I didn't speak German, but once I'd heard myself mumble Zeitzender Capit, and when I looked it up later, it meant time fuse broken. It had shaken me more than I admitted to anyone. That day in the shop, as I held the clock's face in my palm, my thumb pressed against the cool glass, I felt a jolt of something that wasn't mine. Not a memory exactly, more like a moment unspooling in front of me. My view of the shop blurred, replaced by a pair of dirty hands, my hands, but not, wiring something inside a metal case. I could feel the weight of it. I knew it was explosive before the thought even formed. And then there was the ticking, not the patient, steady tick of a clock on a workbench. This was urgent, sharp, alive, counting down. The sound followed me after I snapped out of it. I walked to the sink, washed my hands, and tried to shake it off. I told myself it was stress, maybe from working too many hours. But later that night, when I tried to sleep, I heard the ticking again. Not in my ears, but in my skull, like it was coming from inside my head. The next morning, I woke up at 4:12 a.m., sitting upright on the living room floor with a half-disassembled travel clock in my lap. I have no memory of getting out of bed, walking to my tools, or starting the work. My fingertips smelled faintly of oil and something sharper, like old gunpowder. I didn't own anything that could smell like that. By the end of the week, I was taking apart every clock I owned. Not to fix them, I'd pull them apart, remove the mainsprings, and lay the guts out in rows, as though I was following some design. I couldn't explain it. I wasn't even looking at the clocks anymore. I was building something in my head. It was Saturday when a man came into the shop who changed everything. He was in his 70s, thin, with a tremor in his left hand. He set a battered silver alarm clock on the counter and said in German accented English, "This, I think you will know what to do." I told him I could take a look, but he just stood there, watching me. The ticking from the clock was uneven, sickly, and I opened the back to see why. My hands froze halfway in. Inside, instead of the usual clockwork, there was an empty cavity lined with faint scorch marks. I knew instantly what it had been. This wasn't a clock. It was a shell, an old disguise. I looked up, and he was still staring at me. "Where did you get this?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just leaned in and said softly, "You worked with men like me once. You fixed our timers in Basel, 1943. I laughed, a nervous, stupid laugh, and said he must be confusing me with someone else. But my palms were damp, my throat felt tight. I told him to leave the clock, that I'd clean it out. He nodded, almost like we'd agreed on something without speaking it. Then he left. That night, I dreamed in perfect detail, not just sights, smells, heat, fear. I was in a dim workshop, the air thick with cigarette smoke, bent over a half-built explosive hidden inside an alarm clock casing. A man with that same German accent was telling me to hurry. My fingers moved fast, fitting the time fuse in place. And then there was shouting outside, boots on stone steps, and the sudden, deafening crash of the door. I remember looking at my own hands, thinking I'd never see them again. A soldier grabbed me. The last thing I heard was the ticking. I woke up gasping, my sheets twisted tight around me, my right wrist aching like it had been bound. When I pulled the covers back, there was a deep red line around it. No bruise, no cut, just a mark, like I'd worn a rope all night. I tried to ignore it. I went to the shop as usual, kept my head down, avoided looking at that silver clock. But my customers kept bringing in pieces that triggered something in me. A wall clock from the 1940s with a false compartment. A pocket watch with the mainspring, removed, its space perfectly shaped for something else. Every time, my stomach knotted. 2 weeks later, I couldn't take it anymore. I closed the shop early and locked the door. I took the silver clock to my workbench and laid out my tools. My hands moved like they were following a memory, not a plan. I rewired the clock's insides, adding parts from 3 others. I didn't know why I was doing it, only that I had to. The ticking grew louder, even before I wound it. By the time I was done, I realized what I'd built, a working timer. No explosive, but the mechanism was perfect. My hands were trembling. That night, the old man returned. I don't know how he knew to come. He didn't knock, just stepped inside when I forgot to lock up. He looked at the finished piece, smiled, and said, "It is just as you made them then, just as before." I asked him what he wanted from me, my voice shaking. He told me about the war, about a Swiss-born watchmaker recruited by resistance fighters to build timed explosives for sabotage against Axis supply lines, about a betrayal, an arrest, and execution. "They said you never broke under torture," he whispered, "but the work never left you." I told him I wasn't that man, couldn't be. He just looked at me for a long time, then reached into his coat pocket and set down a photograph. My throat went dry. It was a black and white image of a man in his 30s, hair slicked back, sleeves rolled to his elbows, bent over a workbench. The face was mine, only sharper, younger. "I was there," he said. "You saved my life once. I am here to return the favor. You must finish what you started." I shoved the clock toward him and told him to take it. I didn't care what it meant, but he shook his head. "No, it is yours, and it will tick until you understand." Then he left, leaving the photograph behind. The next morning, the clock was gone from my workbench. I searched everywhere, the shop, my apartment, nothing. For a few days, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. That stress and lack of sleep had twisted my mind. Then the letters started arriving, that no return address, just envelopes with small, precise handwriting. Inside each was a diagram of a clock, always the same model, with red markings over certain gears and springs. I recognized the layouts instantly. They weren't repair guides. They were instructions, and each letter was dated, not from now, but from the 1940s. The ink faded and the paper brittle. I stopped opening them after the 5th one. But it didn't matter. The designs were already burned into my mind. When I closed my eyes, I could see them, feel the parts between my fingers. A month later, I woke again at 4:12 a.m., the same time as before. I was in my workshop, my tools laid out neatly, and in front of me was a half-built clock I didn't own. I don't remember starting it, but I knew exactly what it was for. I could feel the urgency, the weight of it. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice whispered, "This one matters." I didn't finish it. I couldn't. I locked it in a steel cabinet in the shop's back room, wrapped in cloth so I wouldn't have to see it. I told myself I'd throw it away. I never did. The last time I saw the old man was 3 weeks ago. He was standing across the street from the shop, hands in his coat pockets, watching me close up for the night. He didn't smile this time, just nodded once, slowly, like we'd reached some unspoken point of no return. Then he turned and walked away. Since then, the ticking hasn't stopped. It's not in any clock I own. It's not even in the shop. It's in my head, steady and patient. I've stopped trying to drown it out. Some nights, I sit at the workbench and let my hands move the way they want to. I tell myself I'm not building anything dangerous, just fixing what's broken. But sometimes when I catch my reflection in the shop window, I don't recognize the man staring back, and in those moments, I know the truth. The work never left me because I never left it. The other night, the ticking got faster. I don't know what that means, but I remember that when it stops, something happens, something final, and for reasons I can't explain. I think I'm almost ready for it. Story number 2. I was halfway through my shift when I noticed the tunnel wall wasn't right. I'd been working the Katawas coal mines for 5 years by then, so I knew the feel of the rock, the sound it made under a pick, even the subtle change in the air when you were near a weak spot. This wall was different. The coal here wasn't just layered, it looked scarred, like something had clawed at it decades ago. I was alone in that section, hammering and prying, my boots sinking slightly into the damp floor. Every hit made a dull, muffled thud, like there was something behind it. I don't know why I leaned my head against the wall, but when I did, the sound came. Faint at first, a metallic rhythm. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap. It wasn't machinery, it was too deliberate, too slow, like someone trying to send a message. I froze, pick still in my hand, and listened. The air in the tunnel felt heavier, as though it pressed against my chest. I called out, "Kotam?" expecting one of the guys to laugh back. Nothing, just that rhythm again. My heart was pounding by the time I swung the pick at the wall. A chunk fell away, releasing a stale, cold draft that smelled of rust and something sweeter. Rotting wood maybe, or no. It was worse than that. The hole was too small to see through, but the tapping stopped. The silence was worse. I should have gone back to the surface, but instead I widened the hole. Every strike sent shivers into my arms, and I kept imagining the wall giving way to some empty shaft that hadn't been used in decades. When the last slab fell, I was staring into a narrow passage that wasn't on any of our maps. The walls were lined with old wooden beams, blackened with age and mold, the kind they stopped using before the war. The air was colder in there, biting at my face. I stepped in without thinking, my headlamp beam cutting a cone through the dark. About 10 meters in, the tunnel sloped sharply down, and that's when the feeling started. Not fear exactly, but familiarity. My chest tightened, and I knew, in the same way you know your own reflection, that I had been there before. I ran, my fingers along the wall, and it was like touching skin I hadn't felt in years. I saw flashes in my mind, my hands smaller, rougher, nails broken. I wasn't wearing gloves. There was a smell of wet earth and sweat, and voices shouting in German behind me. I jerked my hand away, panting. I told myself it was exhaustion, low oxygen, something like that. But the tunnel kept pulling me in. I found myself whispering, "Not here again." My voice cracked. I didn't even know why I'd said it. Further in, the beams were cracked and bent inward, as if the earth had tried to swallow them. I kept moving until my boot hit something that clinked. I looked down, a dented metal bowl. I bent to pick it up, and the moment I touched it, my vision snapped into another time. I was crouched on the floor, knees drawn up, shoveling watery soup into my mouth as fast as I could before a guard came by. Round me, dozens of children sat in the same darkness, coughing, too weak to lift their heads. I dropped the bowl and staggered back, gasping for air. My own breathing sounded like theirs. I could hear chains rattling. I turned, and in the corner of my light I saw a figure, small, bony, head shaved. A boy. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there watching me. My legs went weak. I blinked hard, and he was gone. But the sound of breathing, shallow, desperate, stayed. I should have run. Instead, I went deeper. The slope led to a wider chamber, and the floor was littered with scraps, a broken wooden spoon, strips of fabric, a rusted tin cup. My hands shook as I picked up one of the fabric pieces. It was striped, thin. I knew it instantly. Camp uniform. I dropped it and backed away until my spine hit the wall. The memories came harder now. I wasn't just remembering. I was there. I could feel the hunger gnawing my insides, the ache in my legs from hours of digging, the grit of cold dust in my teeth. I heard the crack of a whip. My arms burned from swinging a pick that was too heavy for me. I saw the face of another boy, Marek, his cheekbones sharp as knives. We'd whispered to each other about stealing bread, but he never came back from the next shift. I started crying, and I didn't even know if it was for me now or for whoever I'd been then. My lamp flickered, and in that dim flash, I saw them. Children, maybe 20 of them, all thin as skeletons, standing in a half circle. Their eyes were too large, too dark, and they were looking at me like I was supposed to do something. My throat went dry. "I can't," I whispered. "I can't get you out." The ground shuddered, a faint vibration that sent dust raining from the beams. My lamp went out. I was in complete blackness, and in that dark, the air filled with the sound of picks striking rock, echoing from every direction. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop. Then the picks turned into fists pounding the walls, faster, louder, until I felt it in my ribs. I dropped to my knees, and In the black, a hand touched my shoulder. Small, cold. The instant it did, everything went silent. Then a whisper, "You left us." My own voice screamed back before I could stop it. "I died here too." The words tore out of me, raw and real. I didn't even know I believed them until that moment. The hand slipped away, and my lamp blinked back on. The chamber was empty, no children, no bowls, no fabric, just rock and dust. I crawled out, shaking, my knees scraping against the floor. When I reached the opening back into the active tunnel, the smell changed, fresher air, coal dust I knew. I dropped my pick and just lay there until someone found me. I told the foreman I'd gotten turned around, that I'd found an old maintenance shaft and panicked. He didn't question it, just told me to get checked for gas exposure. But I couldn't shake it. That night, I dreamed of the tunnels, but I was shorter again, my hands blistered, my stomach empty. Marek was there, smiling faintly before a shadow took him away. A week later, I went back. I told myself I was looking for proof, something physical I could hold to convince myself it wasn't just my head. The hole I'd made in the wall was still there, but the passage beyond was gone, just solid rock, as though it had never existed. I stood there, breathing hard, running my hands over the stone, trying to feel the seams. Nothing. I didn't tell anyone after that. Not the other miners, not my family. But the memories stayed. Not like dreams, sharper than that. I could recall the feel of the wooden beams against my back when I rested, the taste of the thin soup, the way my wrists hurt from the rope burns, and always Marek's voice whispering in the dark. Over time, little things started to happen. I'd wake with dirt under my fingernails, even on days I hadn't worked. Once, I bit into bread and spat it out, convinced it was moldy, but everyone else said it was fresh. I started avoiding the deep tunnels, sticking to surface jobs when I could. Still, some days, in the quiet, I'd hear the tapping again. Slow, deliberate, impossible to ignore. I began reading about the history of the mines. Buried in an old archive, I found a single paragraph about forced labor during the Nazi occupation. Children from nearby towns, and even from camps, made to dig coal for the war effort. Many died from starvation, collapse, or disease. Their bodies were disposed of on site. No names, no numbers, just a line saying, "Many sections have since been sealed. It should have been closure." Instead, it made the memories heavier, like they belonged to me more than ever. I stopped working the mines 2 years later, but the smell of coal still catches me sometimes. And when it does, I'm there again. The slope, the chamber, the circle of children. The last time it happened was in my own basement. I was fixing a water pipe when I heard it. Tap-a-tap-tap, pause, tap-tap. I froze, wrench in hand, heart hammering. The sound was coming from the far wall, the one that backed onto nothing but dirt. I stood there a long time, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. I walked away, left the wrench on the floor, and didn't go back for days. When I finally did, the sound was gone, but a small pile of coal dust sat against the wall. No one else had been down there. I sometimes wonder if the children are still waiting, if they'll follow me wherever I go. Maybe they already have. And maybe, just maybe, when I die again, I'll find myself back in that tunnel. A pick in my hands, Marek beside me, only this time, I won't leave before the work is done. Story number 3. I was halfway through fixing the back leg of my father's old armchair when I heard it again, soft at first, like someone humming under their breath, just enough to make me stop what I was doing. I sat still, head tilted, listening. It was coming from the kitchen. Not unusual, except for the fact that I live alone. I put the screwdriver down and walked slowly across the living room, my socks sliding slightly on the floorboards. It was a tune I didn't recognize at first, something slow, deliberate, repetitive. Each note seemed to stick in my head as if I'd heard it before long ago, maybe in a film or an old radio recording. As I stepped into the doorway, the humming stopped. The kitchen was empty, just the faint ticking of the wall clock above the fridge. I thought maybe it was one of those moments where you think you hear something but it's just your brain playing tricks, like when you think someone's called your name. I shrugged it off and went back to the armchair. 10 minutes later, there it was again, louder, and this time I could make out the melody more clearly. It wasn't random humming, it was structured, almost like a marching tune, but slowed down. It bothered me enough that I called my sister. "Ingrid, do you know this song?" I hummed the few bars I could remember. She was quiet for a moment. "No, sounds German though, why?" I told her it kept happening and half-jokingly said maybe I was going crazy. She laughed but then asked, "Wait, you mean you actually hear it inside the house?" The next day, it happened again, but this time I caught myself doing it. I was standing at the sink, rinsing a cup, and without thinking, I was humming the same melody. I stopped mid-note, my chest tightening. I don't hum, I don't sing. I couldn't remember when I'd learned the tune or why I knew the next note before I made it. That night, I dreamed I was lying on a hard wooden bunk, the air thick and cold. In the distance, men's voices sang the same melody in low, mournful tones. I couldn't understand the words, but the sound filled me with a mix of fear and sorrow so deep it made my stomach twist. When I woke up, my pillow was damp with sweat. The following week, Ingrid came over for dinner. Halfway through eating, I caught her staring at me with this frozen expression. "What?" I asked, fork halfway to my mouth. She shook her head slowly. "You were humming it again. Exactly the same. I don't know, it's giving me goosebumps." She left early, clearly unsettled, and texted me later that night. I called Uncle Lars. He says he's heard that tune before. The next day, she came over with an old cassette tape. The label was worn. Just the word Odense written in faded ink. She pressed play. The tape hissed, and then I heard it, my tune. But this time it had words, sung in deep, weary German voices. Uncle Lars told her he'd first heard the recording when researching local history years ago. It was a prisoner's song, recorded secretly in 1943 in a German POW camp outside Odense. The men singing had been captured soldiers and political prisoners. Most of them were executed before the end of the war. I didn't know what to do with that information. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the dreams kept coming. They grew more vivid: wooden walls, sweating with damp, the clink of metal cups, a guard's heavy boots approaching. I'd wake with my jaw clenched so tightly it hurt to open it. One afternoon, while walking back from the shop, I saw an old man sitting on a bench near the park. As I passed, he began humming my song. I froze, mid-step. He noticed and looked up at me with piercing blue eyes. "You know it," he said in Danish, his voice hoarse. I sat down beside him, my hands trembling. "Where did you hear that?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "I was there," he said. "Odense camp. I was 19. We sang to keep our spirits while we waited." My skin prickled. I told him I'd been hearing it for weeks, in my own head, without knowing why. He stared at me for a long moment, then whispered, "They didn't bury us all in the camp. Some they took to the woods. I remember the trees. That night, I dreamed of the woods, tall, black silhouettes against a gray sky. I could smell the damp earth." The song was louder than ever, but this time I understood some of the words. They spoke of home, of mothers, of the cold, and then the crack of a rifle. I woke gasping, the sound still ringing in my ears. I started researching. Odense did have a temporary POW camp during the war. Official records claimed most prisoners were sent elsewhere, but a few old, unverified testimonies mentioned small executions in nearby forests. No burial sites had ever been confirmed. Ingrid begged me to drop it. "This is eating you alive," she said. But I couldn't. It felt like the song was pulling me somewhere. A few nights later, I drove out of the city to the forest on the outskirts. I didn't tell anyone. I just needed to see it. The air felt heavier there. I walked along a narrow path, my torchlight cutting through the dark. At some point, I realized I was humming. I stopped, heart hammering, but my feet kept moving, almost like I was following the sound in my own head. It led me to a clearing, overgrown but oddly level, as if the trees had chosen not to reclaim it. My chest tightened, and I knelt down without knowing why. I ran my fingers over the soil. It felt looser here, disturbed at some point. I stayed there for what felt like hours, fighting the urge to dig with my bare hands. Eventually, I forced myself back to the car. That night, I couldn't sleep. The melody looped in my mind until it felt unbearable. Around 3 a.m., I gave in. I drove back to the clearing with a shovel. Every shovelful of dirt felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself didn't want to give up its secrets. After an hour, my spade hit something solid. It was wood, rotting, but still holding shape. My breathing became shallow. I pulled more dirt away, revealing the outline of a box. No, a coffin. I froze, gripping the shovel so tightly my knuckles hurt. A part of me screamed to stop, to leave it alone, but I couldn't. I pried the lid open just enough to see inside. Bones, tattered fabric that might have once been a uniform, and something else, a rusted harmonica lying across the ribs. My throat closed. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I shoved the dirt back over as quickly as I could, hands shaking, chest pounding. When I got home, I went straight to the shower, trying to scrub the smell of earth and rot from my skin. But as the water ran over me, I realized I was humming again. Not softly, loudly, forcefully, like I was leading the song. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood to make it stop. The next day, I told Ingrid everything. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Do you even hear yourself? You dug up a grave. You need help. I promised her I'd stop, that I wouldn't go back. But something changed after that night. The dreams stopped. The humming faded, day by day, until one morning, I realized I hadn't thought about the song in weeks. I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Months later, I read in the local paper that a hiker had found what authorities believed to be a WWII burial site. In that same forest, they reported several sets of remains, one with a harmonica, rusted to the ribs. They planned to render the remains with proper honors. I never told anyone I'd been there first. I didn't want to be part of it. But when I saw the photo of the harmonica in the paper, I felt something strange. Not fear, not relief, but a quiet sense of completion, like someone had finally been heard. And sometimes when the house is still, I almost think I hear it again, just faintly, far away, like voices carried on the wind. But it doesn't scare me anymore. I don't hum along. I just listen and let them finish their song. Story number 4. I was walking home from the market with a loaf of bread tucked under my arm, when I saw him again, standing at the corner near the old stone fountain. Same worn gray coat, same pressed trousers, same stiff, deliberate way of holding, his hands behind his back as though he were measuring the air. I'd seen him dozens of times before in Split, but I had never seen him cross into the southern quarter. Always the same pattern. He would stop at the mouth of a narrow street, glance down it like someone peering into a tunnel, then shake his head and turn away. Today, though, he was staring longer than usual, his lips moving like he was whispering to someone who wasn't there. I slowed without meaning to. He must have noticed, because his head jerked, and for a second our eyes locked. They were pale, watery, but sharp, like the eyes of someone who had been keeping watch for years. Then he turned and started walking away quickly, his coat swinging. I don't know why I followed. Maybe curiosity, maybe boredom. I'd heard stories about him from the butcher, how he was a tailor once, respected, even elegant, before something happened in '81 that made him odd. People said he refused to walk certain streets. No one knew why. He didn't look back, didn't say a word, just kept to the wider lanes, skirting certain alleys as if they were fenced with barbed wire. I called out, "Господин, are you all right?" He stopped mid-step but didn't turn. Then, in a voice so low I almost didn't catch it, he said, "Fire and screams." I thought maybe I'd misheard. "What?" I asked, but he started walking again. I followed. We passed shops, stray cats, the smell of fresh bread, all perfectly normal, until he stopped dead at the edge of another street. It wasn't remarkable, narrow, cobblestoned, laundry strung between windows, but the way he stood there, his hands clenched now, not behind his back, and his shoulders trembled. I stepped beside him and peered down. "What's wrong with this street?" He swallowed hard. "I was here, not me now, but me before, when they burned it." It was such an absurd thing to say that I laughed before I could stop myself, then felt guilty. "When they burned it." 43, he said. His gaze was fixed somewhere far past the buildings, like he was looking through time. "They rounded us up, shot some, locked the rest inside. Then, fire." "You mean in the war?" He nodded once, The last time I saw the street, it was red. Walls falling. The smell, his voice cracked, and he pressed a hand over his mouth. I should have walked away. I should have told myself he was just another old man whose mind had gone soft with age. But something in the way his fingers twitched, the way his breathing hitched, like he could still feel heat on his skin, made me stay. Were you here in Split during the war? No. His answer was sharp, almost angry. I was born in Zagreb, 1947. This street shouldn't be in my head. A breeze stirred, but my skin prickled like the air had grown hotter. So how I dream it? He cut me off. Not once. Always. The boots on the stones. The shouts in German. The crying of a child. High, sharp. And then, he gestured down the street like he was releasing something from his hands. Flames. I can't step there. Not since '81. That's when I remembered. I didn't understand. He explained in a halting voice that in 1981, walking through Split, he'd turned down that street without thinking. The moment his shoe touched the first cobblestone, it was like he'd fallen into a pit. He saw soldiers, heard screams, felt the crush of people around him, the heat against his back. He ran, and when he came to, he was in a quiet square, trembling, so hard he could barely breathe. Ever since, he hadn't been able to set foot there. I asked what made him so sure it was real and not just a nightmare. He gave me a look that made me feel suddenly small, because I remember the name they called me. He said, Matteo. I remember the face of the man who hit me with the rifle. I remember the sound of my mother's voice as they pushed her inside the house. We stood in silence for a long time. Then he said, "Do you want to see?" I hesitated, but nodded. He didn't move. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn photograph, black and white, edges curled. It showed a row of buildings, their upper floors scorched, windows gaping like sockets. Men in uniforms stood in the foreground, rifles slung, their faces blurred. In the corner, you could just make out a figure, small, thin, clutching something to his chest. "That's me," he said, or who I was. I felt a chill. "Where did you get this?" "From a man in Zagreb who collects war photos. I found it in '82. I didn't tell him I recognized myself. How could I? He tucked the photo away. The Tailor's hands don't shake for nothing. They remember the heat. I told him I believed him, and I wasn't lying. Something in his voice, the precision of his details, didn't feel like invention. He looked at me carefully, then asked, "Will you walk it for me?" "What?" "Down the street. Tell me if it feels wrong." I didn't want to. Every instinct told me not to step into that narrow gap between buildings, but my legs moved anyway. The cobblestones clicked under my shoes, the air close and still. The first few steps were fine, just another quiet street. Then halfway down, I caught it. A faint, acrid smell, like burnt wood. I told myself it was just someone's stove, but the further I went, the stronger it grew, and my chest tightened. My ears filled with a faint roar, like distant wind, but it wasn't wind. I turned to call back to him, but he was gone from sight, still standing at the corner. His face was pale, eyes wide, like he could see something behind me. And then I heard it, a short, sharp cry, a child's voice, somewhere ahead, cutting through the air like a knife. I froze. It came again, and my stomach turned because it wasn't a modern cry. It was thin, desperate, threaded with a kind of terror I'd never heard before. The street tilted under me. For a moment I wasn't in 1981, or 1983, or whatever year it was now. The buildings were closer, smoke curling from the windows. Shadows moved fast along the walls. A soldier brushed past me, his breath ragged, his boots leaving wet prints. I couldn't move. Somewhere ahead, a door slammed, and the cry turned into a scream. Then it all snapped back. The quiet, the laundry hanging above, the far-off chatter of people in another street. I ran back toward him, heart hammering. He didn't ask what I saw, just nodded like he already knew. "You felt it." I wanted to deny it, but my voice caught. "Yes, I've read about it," he said softly. "Some call it memory without a body, some call it punishment. I call it what it is. The last steps of a man who didn't get to walk away." I asked if he'd ever thought about trying to go all the way down the street, to the end. He shook his head. I know what's there. I know what happens. You don't need to watch the door close again to remember being inside. We stood there until the sound of church bells carried from somewhere in the distance. He straightened. His coat nodded to me like a soldier giving a farewell and turned away. I watched him go, his steps measured, avoiding every narrow street like they were rivers of fire. I tried to put it out of my mind, but that night, lying in bed, I smelled smoke. Not the faint whiff of someone burning wood, thick, choking smoke that clung to my throat. I sat up, my ears straining, and in the stillness, I heard it again, that thin, desperate cry drifting through the dark. I didn't sleep. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was just imagination, a trick from my conversation with him. But the next day, at the market, I asked the butcher if he knew what had happened in that street during the war. He looked at me, strangely, then told me the Germans had executed a group of partisans there in 1943, burning several houses with people inside. Any survivors? I asked. He shook his head. Only one child, they say. But he died 2 days later from his burns. I thanked him and walked home. As I passed the old stone fountain, I saw the tailor again. He didn't look at me this time, just stared down another street, lips moving in that same whisper. I thought about saying something, but the words stuck, because I knew now that whatever he carried, I had carried it for a moment too, and I didn't want to find out if, someday, it might decide to follow me home for good. Story number 5. I was halfway through my second year at the academy when the first painting happened. I hadn't planned it, hadn't even sketched anything beforehand. I was supposed to be working on an abstract assignment, shapes, lines, no realism. But my hand wouldn't obey. My brush started moving fast, almost frantic, dragging dark strokes across the canvas. I remember thinking, this isn't me. I don't paint like this. When I stepped back, my stomach twisted. The scene was a street, narrow, with cracked cobblestones, buildings torn open like broken teeth, windows hanging loose, frames splintered. Smoke seemed to rise right out of the paint, even though I hadn't used anything but shades of gray. I left it to dry overnight. The next day, when I walked into class carrying it under my arm, Professor Marin froze halfway through greeting me. He just stared. His voice was low when he asked, "Where did you see this?" I told him I hadn't, that it just came out of nowhere. He didn't look convinced. He said we'd talk later, but he didn't. He kept glancing at me throughout class though, like I'd done something wrong. A week later, I did it again. Same thing, no plan, no thought. Just a sudden pull to put brush to canvas. My hand moved like I was remembering something instead of creating it. This time, there were bodies in the street. Small, still shapes covered in ash. A pram lying on its side. I don't remember choosing to add those details, but they were there when I stepped back. I didn't even notice I was crying until drops hit the palate. That night, I woke up to the smell of smoke, not cigarette smoke, thick, choking, chemical smoke. My eyes watered. I stumbled to the window thinking there was a fire, but outside the street was dark and empty. The smell was coming from inside my room. I checked the kitchen, the bathroom, nothing. But when I came back, the second painting was wet again, fresh, like I just painted it. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I opened the window and sat there until the air felt clear again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. A few days later, I carried both paintings to a local cafe that sometimes displayed student work. As soon as I set them down, the owner, a woman in her 70s, went pale. She touched the first one lightly, then pulled her hand back like it burned. "Varna," she said, "before the fire." She told me she was a child during the war, but she remembered that street. There had been an air raid in 1941. She said the smell, the dust, the screams, it all came back just looking at the paintings. I laughed nervously, told her it was just coincidence, but she shook her head. The second one, I saw that. I saw the baby carriage. She told me things I hadn't painted, how there had been a man yelling for his wife, how the church bell had kept ringing even after the tower collapsed. I didn't know what to say. After that, I tried not to paint at all, but it didn't work. One evening, I sat down just to clean my brushes, and without thinking I was painting again. This time, the scene was worse. A boy about my age, lying face down in a puddle, his hair matted with blood. A bicycle bent in half beside him. I felt sick while I painted, like my stomach was turning inside out. My vision blurred, but I couldn't stop until it was done. When I stepped back, the boy's face looked familiar, not from real life, but from a dream I'd had years ago, where I was running through streets with bombs falling behind me. That night, the dreams came back. They weren't like normal dreams, they were too sharp, too detailed. I was inside that street. I could feel the heat on my back, smell the dust and ash. People were screaming in Bulgarian, some in German. A hand grabbed mine and pulled me into a doorway. I looked down, it was the boy from the painting, his eyes wide, terrified. Then there was a blinding flash and everything went black. I woke up gasping, my bedsheets damp with sweat. I started asking around quietly, showing people in Varna's old district my work. Some just shrugged, but a few gave me strange looks. One man, maybe in his 80s, told me I had painted Slivnica Street before it vanished. He said he lost his brother there during the raid. When I asked about a boy with a bicycle, he went silent. Then he muttered something about not digging up the dead and walked away. The more I painted, the more my own life started to blur. I'd catch myself thinking about ration lines, about hiding in basements. Once, while walking to class, I stopped dead because I heard an air raid siren. But the street around me was normal cars, people, no panic. Still, the sound echoed in my head for minutes afterward. One afternoon, Professor Marin asked me to stay after class. He closed the door, leaned against his desk, and said, "You need to tell me where you've been getting these images." His tone wasn't angry, it was worried. I told him again that I didn't know, that they just appeared. He rubbed his temples and said his grandmother had lived through the bombing of Varna and described scenes exactly like mine. Then he said something that chilled me. She always mentioned a girl who drew. Even during the raids, she would sit with chalk on the pavement, sketching the street as it burned. She didn't survive. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about that. I started to wonder if I was remembering something I'd lived before. It made no sense, but nothing else fit. I tried researching the bombing, looking for photos, names, anything. There were only fragments, lists of the dead, blurry black and white images. But in one grainy photograph, I saw her, the girl, sitting cross-legged on the ground, chalk in hand, dust in her hair. And she was me, not just a resemblance. It was my face, my eyes, even the same small scar above my eyebrow. The moment I saw it, I felt something shift, a weight pressing down on me, like someone had been waiting for me to realize. That night, I painted again without meaning to. This one was different, closer, almost like a self-portrait, but the clothes were old, torn, bloodied. Behind me, buildings leaned at impossible angles, and a wall of fire swallowed the sky. When I finished, I felt empty, like whatever was inside me had finally stepped out. I didn't want to keep it in my apartment. I wrapped the painting in cloth and took it to the pier. I was going to throw it into the sea, but as I unwrapped it, I saw something new. The paint was wet again, but it was changing. The face wasn't mine anymore, it was the boy with the bicycle, smiling faintly. The background was calm, the street whole, no fire, no rubble, just peace. I don't know why, but I started crying. The smell of smoke was gone. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I left the painting on a bench and walked away. When I came back the next day, it was gone. Since then, I haven't painted the streets again. Sometimes I still dream of them, but the dreams are quiet now. No bombs, no screams, just the sound of chalk on stone and the feeling that someone is watching from a distance, making sure I'm still here. And maybe, in some strange way, that's all they ever wanted, to be remembered and to be finished. Story number 6. I was halfway through loading the crates when it happened again. My hands went numb, not from the cold, but from that sudden, sharp drop into another place. I didn't even feel the splinter that went into my palm until later. One second I was standing on the dock in Murmansk, listening to the groan of the crane chains. The next I was crouched behind a metal bulkhead, snow whipping into my eyes, bullets cracking somewhere beyond the hull. I could smell the oil, thick and choking, feel my teeth clacking from the cold, and then it was gone, like someone had yanked me backwards into my own skin. Pavel shouted from the winch, "You sleeping on your feet again, Sasha?" I waved him off, but my breath was shaking and my knees felt hollow. It's been happening for months now. At first I thought it was just exhaustion. Dock work in winter does that to you. The freezing wind, the salt in your throat, the ache in your joints. But this wasn't normal fatigue. It was too specific. Every time it happened, I wasn't just imagining the cold. I was somewhere else entirely, and it wasn't any memory of mine. The first time, I was standing on ice so thin I could hear it cracking under my boots. The second, I was running along a deck slick with frozen blood. Someone screaming orders in Russian, but older Russian, the kind I only half understood. I started keeping it to myself because I didn't want to be that person, you know, the one everyone whispers about, says they've gone soft in the head. I've fought too hard for people here to even halfway accept me as I am. I couldn't give them another reason to push me out. I'd only been on hormones a year, still saving for surgery, and every ruble came from these shifts. So I swallowed it, pretended it wasn't real, but they kept getting stronger. 2 weeks ago, I woke up in my apartment with my clothes on, boots laced, and no memory of leaving the dock. My legs ached like I'd been running for miles. There was dirt under, my fingernails black and oily. I couldn't explain it. I didn't tell anyone. Last night, after my shift, I stopped at a kiosk for tea and cigarettes. The guy in front of me turned, and for a second his face wasn't his own. His nose was sharper, his jaw heavier, his skin leathered from the cold, and I knew him. I knew he was the man who had been shouting at me during one of the visions. The recognition hit me so hard I dropped my wallet. He glanced at me, no flicker of recognition, just impatience, and walked away. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Today it happened again. Only worse. I was hauling a line onto the dock, the rope, stiff and frozen. My breath was hot in the scarf over my mouth. And then, snap, I was on that same deck, but now I could see everything. The ship was half buried in ice, listening to one side. Men in heavy coats were scrambling, slipping, shouting over each other. The air reeked of smoke and burning metal. Somewhere to my left, a man fell to his knees, clutching his side, blood dark against the snow. I could feel a rifle slung across my back, the strap biting into my shoulder. My hands, not my hands, were raw and cracked. I heard my own voice yell something. Not my voice now, but deeper, rougher, and desperate. Then the sound came, the one that haunts me even now. That hollow, heavy boom, and a shockwave that punched the air from my lungs. The deck under me gave way. I was in the freezing water, my legs kicking uselessly, my coat dragging me down, my mouth filled with salt and ice. I tried to scream, but the cold locked my throat shut. I came back to myself on the dock, doubled over, coughing. My scarf was soaked through, though it hadn't been snowing. Pavel came running over, swearing at me to get inside, but I couldn't speak. I just let him haul me into the break room. My teeth chattered so hard my jaw hurt. I couldn't get warm, even under the blankets, and with the heater blowing at my legs later. When the shift ended, I went home and didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there in the dark, trying to piece it together. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe it was stress or hormones or some nerve thing. But the images were too sharp. The smell of diesel, the weight of the rifle, the exact pattern of frost on the metal. You don't imagine things like that out of nowhere. I started digging. Old naval records, wartime archives, anything I could find about mermaids during the Second World War. Most of it was about the Arctic convoys, ships from Britain bringing supplies to the Soviet Union under constant attack from German aircraft and submarines. There were photos of wrecked ships frozen in the harbor ice, men in thick coats unloading crates. One image stopped me cold, a grainy shot of a deck crew in 1942. My eyes went to the man in the back, rifle slung across his back, scarf wrapped over his mouth. Even blurred, even in black and white, I knew those eyes. They were mine. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at that photo until the lines blurred. My mind kept drifting to that last moment in the freezing water, the darkness swallowing me whole. And I knew, somehow, I knew, I had died there. I told myself I could ignore it. People live with worse. But ignoring it didn't make it stop. In fact, it got worse. The visions didn't wait for me to be on the dock anymore. They came while I was cooking, brushing my teeth, trying to sleep. Always the same arc, the cold, the panic, the sinking. Only now, there was something new, a sound I'd never noticed before. Right before the boom, a faint, metallic ticking, like a clock. Tonight was different. I'd stayed late, helping Pavel with a shipment. The harbor was almost empty. I went out to secure a tarp, and the air felt strange, too still, too sharp. I'd barely touched the rope when the world shifted. I was back on that ship, but it wasn't chaos yet. We were standing in a line, the deck quiet except for the groan of ice. My breath fogged the air in front of me. I turned my head, and there he was, the man from the kiosk, but younger, his face hard with focus. He looked right at me and said, "Don't be late this time." The ticking started, louder now. I followed the sound, moving toward the stern. A crate sat half buried in snow, metal edges frosted white. The ticking was inside. I bent down, my gloves brushing the surface, and the memory, no, the truth, hit me. I'd found that crate before. I'd opened it before, and inside had been the device that killed us. Panic clawed at my throat. I turned to warn the others, but my voice caught, my tongue felt thick. The ticking grew frantic, each beat faster, harder, until it was all I could hear. I lunged for the crate, meaning to throw it overboard, but my boots slipped. The deck was gone beneath me. I was in the water again. The cold stabbing into my chest like knives, my hands flailed, the ticking still pounding in my skull. And then, I woke on the dock. My knees were bleeding, my palms raw. Pavel was nowhere around. The harbor was silent. I stood, shivering, and turned toward the water. Out in the bay, a shape was moving, low, dark, and wrong. For a second it looked like the wreck of that ship, its masts broken, its deck listing. Then it was gone, swallowed by the black. I went home. I locked the door. I sat here, telling you this, because I need someone to believe me. It's not just dreams, not just in my head. I think I've been dragging pieces of that life into this one. Every time I slip into that place, I'm closer to the end. And tonight, when I was under the water, I didn't just feel the cold. I felt hands on my coat, pulling me down. I don't know what happens if I let it go on. I don't know if next time I'll come back. All I know is the ticking hasn't stopped. It's here now, faint but steady, in the walls, in the pipes, in my own bones. And I think, when it stops, so will I. Story number 7. I was half asleep when I first heard it, just a low, dull thump that I thought was maybe the boiler acting up again. But then it came again, steady, almost too steady for a random noise. Thump, 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 a pause, thump. I turned over, annoyed, and checked the time on my clock, just past 2 in the morning. My first thought was that it was one of the neighbors doing some sort of late-night DIY, but that didn't make sense. Nobody builds shelves at 2 in the morning. I lay there listening, trying to decide if it was in my flat or coming from somewhere else. The pattern kept repeating, short bursts, then a pause, then again. I could feel my heartbeat starting to match it without meaning to, and that unsettled me more than the sound itself. The next night, I didn't fall asleep easily, and sure enough, right on cue, the drumming started again. Only now it was louder, clearer. It was coming from the flat above mine. At least, that's where it seemed to be. I'd moved into this building in Dundee just 2 months earlier, a place where the walls were thin enough to hear muffled conversations, if you really listened, but I'd never heard anything like this. I decided I'd go up and knock, maybe even make a joke about them being in a marching band. When I went upstairs, though, the hallway was silent. The light above the door flickered faintly, and I noticed the nameplate was blank. No letters, no number, just an empty metal slot. I knocked anyway, no answer. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. The drumming had stopped completely. I felt stupid standing there in my socks, so I went back downstairs. The next day I asked Mrs. Collins, the woman in the flat across from mine, who lived upstairs. She gave me a funny look and said, "Nobody's lived there in years, dear. It's been locked up since, well, since before I moved in." I waited for her to elaborate, but she didn't. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but her face didn't change. I told myself she was just mistaken. Maybe the landlord kept it for storage, or something. Still, I couldn't shake the weirdness of hearing those beats from an empty flat. On the third night, I decided I was going to record it. I set my phone to record as soon as I got into bed. Lying there in the dark waiting, it didn't take long. The beats started, same as before. Thump, 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 thump. I counted them in my head. It wasn't random. It was in sets, with pauses, almost like instructions or code. When it stopped, I lay there with my phone clutched in my hand, my skin prickling. I played the recording back. What made my stomach twist wasn't the sound itself. It was the fact that it was much louder on the recording than it had been in the room, almost like the microphone had been closer to the source than I was. The next day I took the recording to work and played it for a friend who was in the reserves. His face changed halfway through listening. He told me it sounded like a military snare rhythm, the kind used to keep time during marches. "This is old though," he said, "not modern parade stuff. Feels World War II-ish." I asked him if he could be sure. He shook his head, but the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. He didn't think I was making it up. By the end of the week, it was every night, always around the same time, always the same sequence. My sleep was shredded. I'd wake up before it started, lying there with my chest tight, waiting for the first beat. Then I started to notice something else. Between the sets of drumming, I could hear faint breathing. Not mine, not through the wall or ceiling. Closer, like someone was in the room, but holding perfectly still. I tried to convince myself it was in my head, but that didn't explain why the air in the room felt heavier when it happened, or why I'd find myself gripping the edge of the mattress without realizing it. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the broom from the kitchen and banged the ceiling hard when it started. The drumming stopped instantly. For a moment, I felt victorious. Then, slowly, a new pattern began. This one wasn't marching time. It was slower, deliberate. One beat, long pause, one beat, like a knock, except it was directly under my bed. I leapt up, yanked the covers away, and crouched down to look. Nothing. Just the flat's cheap carpet and the dark gap where it met the skirting board. But the knock came again, and I swear I could feel it through my knees. The next morning, I went to the landlord's office and demanded to know who had the keys to the upstairs flat. He said only he did, and nobody had been in there for years. I told him about the drumming, about the breathing, about the knocks. His expression changed from annoyed to uncomfortable. He admitted that the flat had once been home to a boy named Callum in the early 1950s, whose father had been a drummer in a Scottish regiment during WWII. The father had come back from France in 1944, but had been different, withdrawn, easily startled. He taught Callum military rhythms, but one night the boy's mother came home to find both of them dead. No one knew why. Rumor was the father thought the war was still happening and, well, the landlord trailed off, said it wasn't his place to spread gossip. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in my armchair with every light on, waiting. 2 o'clock came, and with it, the drumming. But this time, it was different. Louder, clearer. Not just upstairs, it was all around me. I could hear the scrape of drumsticks against wood, the faint rasp of someone breathing through their nose, the shuffle of boots. I shouted, "Stop it!" But the sound only grew. The beats became frantic, urgent, like they were pushing me to move. I realized, with a cold shock, that the rhythm was a call, a signal to charge. I didn't know how I knew that, but I did. My whole body felt wired to respond. My legs even twitched, like I was about to run. Then, over the drumming, I heard a voice, low, rough, right next to my ear. "You're not moving, lad." I spun around, but the room was empty. My chest was tight, my skin damp with sweat. The voice came again, harsher this time. "Move." I bolted for the door, yanking it open, and the hallway was wrong. The light was dim, yellow, like an old gas lamp. The wallpaper was peeling, the air thick with smoke and dust. I could hear shouting in the distance, in a language I didn't understand, and somewhere far off, gunfire. I stumbled back into my flat, slammed the door, and everything snapped back to normal. Bright light, clean walls, silence. For the first time in years, I prayed. I didn't sleep until daylight, and when I did, I dreamed I was in a muddy field, drum in hand, watching men fall one by one as bullets ripped through them. I woke up with my hands aching, as though I'd been gripping drumsticks all night. I thought about moving out, but something in me, some stubborn, idiotic part, wanted answers. The next evening, I took a chair and sat under the ceiling, where the sound was loudest. I listened carefully. The beats told a story now. I could hear the rise and fall, the moments of silence that meant someone had fallen. I even began to anticipate them, and then, without realizing it, I started tapping my fingers in time. When I caught myself, I jerked my hands back like they were burning, but the drumming stopped abruptly, and for the first time, I heard footsteps, moving above me, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth, and then, faintly, a child's laugh. That broke something in me. I packed a bag and stayed at a friend's place for a week. When I came back, the building felt hollow. No drumming, no breathing, no voice. I thought maybe it was over. But last night, at exactly 2 in the morning, I woke to find my hands tapping, the rhythm on my own chest, perfectly in time, without me realizing it. And somewhere in the dark, just behind my head, a voice whispered, "Good lad, you're ready." I haven't slept since, and I don't think it's going to stop until I march. Story number 82. I was halfway through clearing out the attic when I found the first one. It was a tiny rifle, no longer than my forearm, carved entirely from wood. The stock, the barrel, even the little trigger guard, all painstakingly shaped. It was old, the wood dry and splintered, but whoever made it had an almost obsessive attention to detail. At first I thought maybe it had belonged to the previous owner's child, some forgotten toy, but it was too exact, too purposeful. I set it aside on a box and kept pulling things down. That was when I noticed the smell, faint like oiled metal, though there was no metal up there at all. By the time I'd cleared the back corner, I'd found 6 more of them, all rifles, all identical. They were lined up neatly behind a beam, as though someone had been storing them for display. I remember crouching there, touching the grooves along one barrel, and thinking, who the hell makes 7 of the exact same wooden gun? That night I couldn't stop thinking about them. Lying in bed, I pictured the way the wood had been worn smooth where a hand would grip it, the way the trigger guard had a tiny gap, like a real one. My head filled with the repetitive scrape of a knife shaping the barrel. I told myself it was nothing, just an odd hobby from a long-gone tenant. But the thought kept coming back. They weren't toys. They were too serious. The next day, I decided to keep one of them in the living room, propped against the shelf, just as a conversation piece, I told myself. But within an hour of setting it there, I felt restless. Something about the angle wasn't right. I found myself taking it down, turning it in my hands, adjusting the buttstock. I don't carve wood. I barely passed shop class in school, but I could suddenly picture exactly how I'd shave the edges to make it feel balanced. I put it back, a little unsettled, but that didn't stop me from going back up to the attic before dinner. That was when I started carving my own. I didn't even plan it. I found a scrap piece of pine near the attic wall and just started. I don't know what came over me. My hands knew what to do. I scraped, shaved, rounded the edges. The movements felt practiced, automatic, like muscle memory I didn't earn. By the time it was dark, I had the beginnings of a rifle stock, the shape fitting perfectly against my shoulder. My hands ached, but in a way that felt good, satisfying, like I'd been doing something important. Over the next week, it became all I wanted to do. I'd get home from work, skip dinner, and sit up there in the attic with my carving knife, making rifle after rifle. The wood chips piled up around me. My fingers blistered, bled, then toughened. I wasn't even looking at reference pictures. I just knew what to do, and they weren't random anymore. Each one was identical to the last, just like the first 7 I'd found. One night, I stayed up there past midnight. The house was silent except for the scrape of my blade. At some point I realized I was humming. It was a slow, strange tune, one I didn't recognize, but my mouth formed it naturally, like I'd known it all my life. The moment I noticed it, my stomach twisted. I put the carving down and tried to stop, but the tune wouldn't leave my head. I hummed it again without meaning to. That was the night I had the first dream. I was lying on my stomach in the snow, my cheek pressed to something cold and hard. I could see through a scope, trees in the distance, a frozen river. My hands gripped a rifle. Not a wooden one, a real one, heavy. The air stank of gunpowder and smoke. I could hear breathing, not mine, someone else's, behind me, quick and nervous. A voice in Finnish barked something I somehow understood. Now I squeezed the trigger. The recoil kicked into my shoulder. Then a sharp pain bloomed in my chest, hot and deep. I looked down, saw the red, and the dream ended. I woke gasping, my heart slamming against my ribs. The smell of oiled metal hung in the air, faint but real. I went to the attic. All the rifles were there, lined up like soldiers. I stood staring at them for a long time, shivering even though the attic was warm. The dreams kept coming. Always the snow, the scope, the voice behind me. Always the same cold rush of aiming at a shape in the distance. And always that moment, the crack of a shot, the bloom of pain. The snow rushing up as I fell. After the third dream, I started waking with my hands clenched as though still holding the rifle. My palms would ache from gripping nothing. One afternoon, a friend stopped by unannounced. He followed me up to the attic, curious about what I'd been working on. "These are disturbing," he said, running his hand over one of the rifles. "Why so many?" I told him I just liked the craft of it, but my voice sounded hollow. He frowned at the row. "You know these aren't exactly hunting rifles, right? These are Mosin Nagants. WWII snipers use them." I stared at him, the name hitting me like a cold wave. I didn't even know I knew that word, but hearing it felt like recognition, like a bell ringing somewhere deep in my chest. That night, the dream changed. I wasn't lying in the snow anymore. I was in a cramped wooden room, cleaning the rifle. My hands moved with practiced precision, stripping it, oiling the parts. There were other men there, their faces tired and thin. One of them clapped me on the shoulder and said something in Finnish, a joke, I think, and I laughed, even though I didn't understand the words. When I woke up, I could still feel the warmth of his hand. From then on, it wasn't just the dreams. During the day, I'd catch myself glancing at rooftops, scanning windows, as though looking for a vantage point. The sight lines in the street started to matter. Which windows had the best view of the road? Which corners offered cover? At work, someone dropped a metal tray, and the sound made my whole body flinch, my mind instantly searching for where the shot came from. The worst was the day I cut my thumb on the carving knife. It wasn't deep, but the sight of my own blood on the wood made something in me twist. I heard that voice again, the same one from the first dream, shouting now. And for a second, I was back there in the snow, the cold air burning my lungs. I dropped the knife and stumbled downstairs, shaking so badly I had to sit on the floor. I decided to get rid of them, every single rifle, mine and the originals. I carried them down to the backyard and stacked them in a pile. The moment I struck the match, my stomach churned. The fire caught fast, flames licking over the stalks. But the smell wasn't burning wood. It was gunpowder, sharp and acrid, like the air after firing a shot. I stepped back, my hands trembling. That night, I didn't dream. For the first time in weeks, I slept straight through. When I woke, I felt light, free, like a fog had lifted. But it didn't last. 3 days later, I was in the attic again. I don't even remember deciding to go up there. It was like my body moved on its own. In the far corner, where the pile had been, there was a single piece of wood. Just a block, freshly cut, smelling faintly of pine. My chest tightened. I picked it up, felt its weight. My fingers twitched. I could already see the shape of the rifle inside it, waiting to be carved out. That night, the dream came back, sharper than ever. I saw the man again, the one whose hand I'd felt on my shoulder. His face was clear now, every line and scar. He was looking at me with a kind of desperate relief. "You came back," he said, and I understood him this time. "We finished what we started." I woke with my carving knife in my hand and a half-formed rifle stock beside me on the bed. I don't remember starting it. The next weeks are a blur. I stopped answering calls. My job let me go. I barely ate. I just carved. Each rifle was perfect, Down to the smallest detail, I knew the feel of the trigger before I carved it, the exact curve of the stock against my cheek. When I wasn't carving, I was cleaning them, even though they were only wood, with motions that made no sense for wood, but felt right for metal. The more I made, the more the dreams felt like memories. I remembered the names of the other men, the sound of their laughter, the taste of the frozen air, and always the voice shouting now, before the shot that ended me. I don't know when I realized it wasn't just memory, it was instruction. Each rifle was a step toward something. I could feel it. A kind of pressure building, a sense of unfinished business. And the more I carved, the closer it came that it happened on a Tuesday. I just finished the 15th rifle. I set it in the row with the others, 15 perfect, identical Mosin-Nagants, all wood, all facing the same way. The moment I stepped back, the air in the attic shifted. It wasn't colder or warmer. It was heavier, like the air before a storm. I heard boots crunching in snow, faint but distinct, circling me. I smelled the gunpowder again. My hands itched to grip a rifle. Then, one by one, they stepped out of the corners. The men from my dreams, thin, pale, dressed in worn uniforms, rifles in hand. They didn't look like ghosts. They looked solid, real. Their breath puffed in the air. The one with the scars on his cheek, the one who'd spoken to me before, stepped forward. He picked up the rifle I'd just carved, looked it over, then handed it to me. "We finish," he said. His eyes were calm. I don't remember making the choice. I just knew I had to. I took the rifle, felt its weight, real and solid in my hands. Not wood anymore. Cold metal, oiled and ready. I walked to the attic window, raised the scope, and looked out. Down on the street, a man in a dark coat was walking, head down, unaware. My breath slowed. My finger found the trigger. When I blinked, the attic was empty. The rifles were gone. All of them. The smell of gunpowder lingered, faint but certain. I never carved again after that. I don't dream anymore either. But sometimes, when I'm walking through town, I catch myself scanning the rooftops, checking windows, marking sightlines, and every so often, I hear that voice, low and steady in the back of my mind. Now,